Hello, and welcome to the next installment of the Autistic Women and Non-Binary Network's Liberating Webinar series. My name is Jess Chi Wing, pronouns they and she, and I am a postdoctoral fellow in English at the College of Worcester. I am a white non-binary person. I have short, dark brown hair and glasses, and I'm wearing a green shirt. To view captions for today, you may click CC and then choose to show subtitle or view full transcript. If you choose show subtitle, you can click and drag to move the subtitle on your screen. You can also access captions in a separate window using the link provided in the chat. Please let us know in the chat if you are experiencing any access issues with captioning, our interpreters, or otherwise, and we will do our best to address the issue. Today's program is Re-envisioning Disability and Madness, Crip Poetics and Cultural Work, and I am joined by three guests. First, Travis Chi Wing Lau, he, him, his, is an assistant professor of English at Kenyon College. His research and teaching focus on 18th and 19th century British literature and culture, health humanities, and disability studies. Alongside his scholarship, Lau frequently writes for venues of public scholarship like Synapsis, a Journal of Health Humanities, Public Books, Lapham's Quarterly, and the Los Angeles Review of Books. His poetry has appeared in Wordgathering, Glass, South Carolina Review, Foglifter, and Hypertext, as well as in two chapbooks, The Bone Setter, Damaged Goods Press 2019, and Pairing, Finishing Line Press 2020. Kelsey Smoot, they, them, theirs, is a PhD candidate in American Studies at the College of William and Mary. Their work explores the process of identity formation at the nexus of race, gender, and sexuality. They name themselves a cultural theorist, a writer, an advocate, and a poet. Having grown up bi-coastal and spending the majority of their adult life in a state of transience, they draw from their eclectic life experiences both deep fear and great optimism regarding what people are capable of. Kelsey seeks to illuminate the experiences of Black queer folks navigating the contemporary US socio-political landscape. And finally, Lo Smith was born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio, and as a result is both aggressively Midwestern and unapologetically Black. Lo is currently based out of Cleveland, Ohio. Their work has recently been shown at the Cleveland Institute of Art, the Granoff Center for Creative Arts, and Emerson College. They enjoy imagining radical futures, baking, and exploring botany. Let's get started. I'm so excited, first of all, to be here and to be here with all of you, some friends, new and old. The first question I had for you is, please just tell us about your work. So specifically, what genre and medium do you work in, and how does disability justice inform your practice and your content? And let's start with Travis.
Hi, everyone. It's lovely to share space with you all, even from afar. So I identify as an academic first, but in many ways I came to poetry as a kind of way of dealing with the conventions of academic writing. So I found academic writing really stifling, really argument-driven, even sort of hostile and antagonistic. So a lot of my work is interested in thinking through the intersections of disability, queerness, and Chinese American experience. But I think first and foremost, I've been trying to think of poetry as the work of description rather than argument, or rather than the articulation of something really specific. A lot of my work is about trying to describe really, really minute and often undescribed experiences, mine here of chronic pain. I have scoliosis-related disabilities, so I have chronic pain, but also experiences of neurodivergence like brain fog. So I like to think about my work as descriptive as much as it is about speculation. I like to think that if academic writing is about articulating an argument with certainty, poetry is the place where I can do speculative work and ask questions without resolution. So that's how I would describe my work.
I love that. Thank you so much. And that definitely resonates. Kelsey, how about you?
Yeah, so similar to Travis, creatively, or like, I guess I identify as an academic, but also as a poet. I'm self-taught. I've been engaging with poetry for like 2.5, maybe 3 years now, so I'm still relatively new. And my affinity towards poetry was kind of born out of a mental health crisis I was experiencing around that time a couple of years ago. And for me, it really started off as like me sending poems to my brother every day, just trying to like find new language to explain what I was experiencing to him, because I felt like very limited by language at the time. My processing capacity was diminished in a way that I had never experienced. I wasn't eating. I was like not really sleeping like that. And I felt really scared. So I was just like struggling to express myself. So I feel like writing to him in a way that deviated from normative, I guess, communication patterns felt really important. And then later it just felt really important to like document and subsequently like proclaim those experiences more broadly. I feel like madness is something that is highly stigmatized in my family. So writing about the type of madness that I experience and publicizing it through poetry feels kind of like a small radical act for me.
As a formerly very depressed graduate student, that also resonates. I love that it was born out of like a communication act of love with your brother. That's excellent. Lo, tell us about your work.
Yeah, hello, my name is Lo. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a printmaker and a historian. My work, so I've been an artist my entire life, and my work first was about medical experimentation on the Black body. Think about J. Marion Sims, the quote unquote father of gynecology, did experiments on Black women's bodies. I have some images to show later. That was this coming into where I'm like, oh, art in my past life was like, oh, this is expression, it's fun, it's freeing. Whereas like now this is a tool to like dig in deeper and like pull things apart and like explore those hidden histories. More recently, I'm bipolar. I found out I was bipolar in a super fun way when I was in grad school, and had a really fun manic episode, which like I've seen that, like, yeah, we're familiar. So right after that, or after my manic episode and I left my MFA program, I was like, okay, how can I use art for like this to be like less terrible? And I started doing workshops called mental health emergency health kits, where you have, I have like pictures of them for later, but my work, it then became much more participatory, much more about community and like figuring out ways we can be interdependent together. And like, especially with mental health stigmas that can be really scary. And like similar to Kelsey, like fighting with my family around what is acceptable mental health, like what are we allowed to talk about and celebrate? And that is what my work rolled into.
I have about 15 screens open right now. Thank you so much for that. I'm sensing a theme, depressed in grad school. I love your description there. I know some of my closest friends in graduate school are exactly the people who helped me navigate a lot of madness that I experienced. My next question for you, could you tell us or show us, if you have slides or if you have images, an example of your work that challenged the ways in which you understand disability and or Crip, MAD, or neurodivergent experiences? And we'll go back to Travis.
All right, I picked one poem that I'd like to share and read with you all. I'm going to drop an accessibility copy of the poem itself in the chat. This poem is entitled Brain Fog, and it's exactly what the title suggests it is. However, all the lines from this are drawn from the opening passages of a Dickens novel called Bleak House, and literally the beginning of it begins in a really kind of murky, foggy, muddy 19th century London. And it has always been such an incredible description of space in this moment, especially at a moment when disability is becoming codified as an identity in relation to industrialization. It really struck me as a kind of metaphor and description of my own experiences of brain fog that feel very spatialized and very disorienting to navigate. So this is brain fog. Implacable, as much mud in the streets as if the waters had but newly retired from the face of the earth, waddling like an elephantine lizard, smoke lowering down, a soft black drizzle, with flakes of soot gone into mourning for the death of the sun, undistinguishable in mire. A general infection of ill temper, losing foothold since the day broke, if this day ever broke, adding new deposits to the crust upon crust of mud, sticking at those points tenaciously. Fog everywhere, fog up the river, fog down the river, where it rolls deified, great and dirty. Fog creeping, fog lying, fog drooping, fog in the eyes and throats, fog in the stem and bowl, fog cruelly pinching the toes and fingers, shivering, a nether sky of fog. The raw afternoon is rawest, and the dense fog is densest, obstruction at the very heart of the fog. The groping and floundering condition, most pestilent, holds this day in the sight of heaven and earth. And I think the last 3 lines for me encapsulate very much what brain fog feels like, a kind of totalizing, groping and floundering condition where I don't necessarily see a way out. And it starts to affect every aspect of my day. That swallowing effect is something I wanted to encapsulate in this poem, which is also why the poem lacks any kind of punctuation, because I wanted it to feel kind of breathless like fog is. So I thought I'd share this one because this one felt most directly about my neurodivergent experience. But yeah, I'm happy to talk more about this or answer questions folks have about it.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. There's a comment in the chat here, loving the fog echolalia. So I will reiterate that, also loving it. Kelsey, could you tell us more about an example of your work?
Sure. Yeah, so just like little context here, what I can say is like, when I first started putting my poetry out there, I gravitated toward this really commonplace narrative of like art, specifically poetry, being very healing. And I definitely like touted that and like clung to that for narrative for a while. Like I was unwell, and then I started writing poetry to like heal myself because that's what people want to hear, and that gives them this like warm fuzzy feeling. But then I started to like introspect more on that kind of like internalized ableism that led me to gravitate towards that narrative, because like as I mentioned before, it was really never about like healing, you know. It was about finding a way to bridge the gap between my suffering and my community. And yeah, I wanted like reprieve from the pain that I was in and what I was experiencing, but like more than anything, I just really wanted my brother to like bear witness to my experience. And I feel like that's a big part just broadly of like existing at the margins in general, is wanting to be acknowledged and affirmed and witnessed in some way. So to that end, I wrote this poem called Grad School and Other Manic Episodes, very on brand with some of this discourse thus far. I don't know, is that dropped in the chat somewhere? Or should I drop that in the chat?
Nancy just put a link in the chat.
Perfect. Okay. All right. 3 a.m., the waking or witching hours. At least 4 days have passed since I've pulled the curtains open, let the sun touch my skin. Am I here again? I feed my body with the dark, crunch stars with brittle teeth, harpoon the moon and swing a feral child space explorer, tiresome like an earworm. Outstretched syncopations, undressing the twilight, breaking glass bottles, painting the walls with them, punch a skylight in my ceiling, find no healing, my friends lied, dial your number, hang up on the second ring, circle random letters in the paper, collapse on dirty socks.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And we move to Lo now.
Hello, thank you for sharing. It says cannot start screen share while other participant is sharing.
This is Lydia. You should be able to share now.
Okay, thank you. Are we seeing work examples?
This is Lydia. Yes, your page is showing up correctly.
Thank you. Okay, this is my slides. Thank you for having me. Thank you everyone for being here. The first slide is three cards from a series called For Lucy. So J. Marion Sims, father of gynecology, really fucked up dude, was experimenting on Black women without anesthesia. And he's also the person who invented the speculum in the Sims birthing position. So anyone who has a uterus who's interacted with healthcare has like interacted with the legacy of this man. So, and the three women he experimented on the most, names were Lucy, Arcadia, and Betsy. You is correct. And I was in school, I studied public health and fine art at the same time. So I was very interested in these hidden histories that weren't hidden. Everyone who has a uterus and has experienced a speculum is like part of this, but it wasn't talked about in a way that was clear, like how we got here. So I became very obsessive over this narrative of how we got here and my experimentation on the Black body. And then I turned to myself with this series, Racism or Gluten, Why Do I Feel This Way? So in sewing, there's a measurement of fabric called a fat square that you use in quilting. That's like a standardized unit as a measurement for fabric. So I made a little zine and all these foods that were both racialized in my life and like caused me a lot of pain that I used to eat regularly. And in the middle of this fabric tent, you can see there's 2 stools and 2 chairs, and those stools are embedded with different foodstuffs that caused conflict in my life. And also, like, as someone who is mad and Black, the tension between like, am I responding through my mental illness? Am I responding because what's happening is racist? And am I responding because of who I am as a person? So this kind of constant ping pong game, for lack of a better word, of trying to self-regulate when it's really hard to understand what's happening. These are 2 pillows, one's of Fruity Pebbles, one's of Flaming Hot Cheetos and Oreos, run through like a specific like printmaking technique where you roll up stuff to transfer dyes. This is the tabletop, one of the 2 tabletops I was referring to. And then lastly, from the Racism or Gluten show, I did a workshop. And in this workshop, people were provided these canvas pouches and we made sigils. And I'm completely stealing the word sigil from a lot of different sources. And the point of the sigil is to make something that you can recognize in your moment of media, something that means something to you. So you show up, we make the sigil, we screen print the sigil with contact paper. So it's a one-off, really quick print, but you have a completely customized pouch. And then regulatory tools like your meds, an oobleck ball, some essential oils if you want to do that, but things to bring you back, and also like a red, green, yellow mental health tool where that helps you recognize when you're heightened and when you're doing okay and when you're like chilling. Yeah, that is a snippet of my work. If you'd like to see more, you can check out my Instagram or my website.
I speak for myself and possibly everyone here. I would absolutely like to see more. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, of course. And like, I can talk about this forever. That was the 5-minute version.
I think that's the hard thing about, we have such a condensed time to talk about. Yeah, I would love to hear you talk more about that. Moving on, I suppose. The next question I had for you, which disabled or Crip, mad, neurodivergent, depressed artists, scholars, and or cultural workers do you look to for guidance? So who's someone who has either transformed your work or informed it in ways that have been really important for you? And we'll go back to Travis.
I feel like this is the hardest question because so much of my work is in dialogue with the incredible amounts of people who have done this work before me. So I'm going to try to narrow the pool a little bit. In terms of neurodivergence and thinking about ways of thinking through different forms of cognition. I'm extremely indebted to the work of Margaret Price, precisely around being in higher education and in institutional spaces. So I'm thinking about the book Mad at School, which really transformed how I thought about myself as a disabled scholar in the academy. But also thinking about what the politics are surrounding neurodivergence in education. So I would say that book first and foremost. The second, probably the work of trans and disabled scholar Mel Chen. Mel Chen's work on brain fog has been deeply important to me, thinking through its racialized components as well as queer and sort of sexuality components. I think of Mel's essay where they talk about in particular the ways in which neurodivergent or non-normative thinking is quite literally the unthinkable in academia. And it just really reminds me the ways in which academia was not made for us in so many ways, but also that to inhabit that space is a kind of anomaly where you're constantly being weeded out or told that you don't belong. And I like to think that that actually does not only exclusively become narrowed down to academia, but in many other spaces, particularly creative spaces. I'm thinking about the ableism of the publishing industry, particularly in poetry, that I have come to know in very distressing and disappointing ways. And then the third would probably be the work of Eli Clare, who has been a profound influence on my own thinking through the intersections between queer, trans, and disabled experience, but also what it means to do this work publicly. This is something that I've been thinking a lot about, what it means for us to do public work in venues like this or in our poetry. We're putting our disability on display in public ways that have our body minds be read in certain ways that may not be legible to other people. And what that feels like and what that experience demands of us is something we don't talk nearly enough. And I think Eli has really sort of taught me how to think about that.
Thank you so much. I could spend a whole panel session just talking about how Eli Clare's work has impacted my personal understandings of disability and the work that I do. Thank you so much for that. And we will move to Kelsey. So the question is, what disabled, Crip, neurodivergent, depressed scholars, artists, cultural workers do you look to for guidance?
Yeah, so I'm thinking of one person in particular, Annie Eleni also, who's an activist, advocate, disability rights expert, and just an overall dope person. A dear friend of mine who I think is in the space, Lindsay Young, who's also a poet and mental health care practitioner. Jess, I feel like you and I have had a number of really awesome conversations where you just kind of expanded my worldview in ways that I really appreciate. And also Lo, I feel like really privileged to be sharing this space with you. We're good friends in a number of ways, but I feel like if you get to know Lo speaks entirely in prophetics, in a way that I'm I literally have we'll be on the phone and I'm just taking notes. And something that I feel was, you probably don't remember this, but it was one of the more profound conversations we've had was, I think me being yeah, it's so dope that, talking about madness and the shit that we go through is way more destigmatized these days. And you were is it? And specifically, Lo was yeah, maybe the cute mental health issues depression and anxiety, nobody wants to talk about some of the things that get marked as dangerous or are truly demonized, I guess, in society, and the ways in which those types of experiences and manifestations of madness really do impact the lived experience, and are almost further stigmatized by how much certain types of mental health issues are getting the forefront. Those are the things that we feel comfortable to talk about. So yeah, Lo, I just want to say, I just want to give you your flowers and just say, I feel like you've really changed the way that I view my work and myself and madness in general.
Thank you so much, and I'll turn to you, Lo.
When I saw that you put this question, who we're looking at, my first answer was like my friends, my family. Kelsey's also on that list, these conversations we have. I will say, like, to qualify it, that depression and anxiety are like very real and valid. I'm not trying to take that away. But I think that particularly when you have, violence, people who can invoke terror in other people when they're in their states. Like, are we talking about that? Like, are we talking about how to like support folk when you're fully manic and like not fully there? Or are we demonizing them as like bad vibes? And so with the people who inspire me, like definitely my friends, Jess, thank you for inviting me. Like, these are all people I know in real life. Definitely Journal of Health with the sick woman theory of like, how do you show up? That was, we read the essay as a group in a past job when I was doing a curated gig, and it really made me shift of like, okay, what do I need to advocate for myself? Not in a bootstrap way, but like, how can I like chip away at this wall that's keeping people from engaging in art spaces and engaging in their communities in like small bits. And like, that's how I came up with like doing workshops as art practice. I'm definitely Imani Barbarin, Crutches and Spice on TikTok. I'm a big social media user, and I think that the work that they're doing, the work that she's doing to do that chip away work. And also, I have a great aunt, I don't know her name yet, but I'm doing family history. She was also bipolar, and she was institutionalized in the 1940s. And like, I can't find her name. And I think that often when we think about mental health, we think about like the current moment, but like not the folk who like did all the work to get us here, and the folk who survived so we could survive, like both as individuals and as a community. So like talking to elders and old people who were mad, and collecting their stories is definitely part of my practice and like who I look to, like my grandma and my aunts and like that person who slipped through the cracks, but like because they survived, I have some framework of how to survive.
Thank you so much. I really love that. I'm thinking of my bipolar great grandmother who I never met. Next question, got very distracted. Oh, also a real story. Lo, Kelsey and I met at a very supportive queer karaoke group. And so I felt that had to be said at some point. So I'm really happy to reunite with you here in this space. The next question I had for you, I'm really excited to hear your response to this. How does lived disability and or Crip, mad, depressed, or neurodivergent or psychotic experience inform and determine your creative process? Another question you might think about, what do you wish people knew about your creative process and how disability knowledge and experience impacts it? And we will go back to Travis for this.
Sure. I think for me, the way I would respond to this question is to think about my situatedness as a writer. So I turned to poetry in graduate school because like I said, I was really exhausted by academic conventions and the sort of stifling, and we'll call it what it is, ableist forms of writing that we're socialized into writing and conforming to. And something that really disturbed me about that style of writing is that it always kind of imagines this distanced, impartial critic who is disembodied, like writing as if there wasn't an actual body mind there doing that labor. So when I turned to poetry, I wanted to do the exact opposite, insist on the fact that there's a body mind producing that work, in my case, particularly a body, mind, in pain. So a lot of my early poems and some of the poems now, I would mark line breaks where pain would actually interrupt my process of producing poetry. So that would create for me a lot of poems that did not look quote unquote traditional in their line breaks that were for meaning, but for line breaks that meant something for pain instead. And it felt really important to me to start doing this because, one, I had to work through my own internalized ableism about trying to conceal that pain or feel like that pain shouldn't get in the way of doing creative work. But the moment I started centering pain as the sort of source of that work and what the work is actually about, I felt like I was doing work that was true to my experience and work that just felt more honest. I feel like something I crave a lot in the different spheres of my life is sincerity. And I think in order for me to model the sincerity I wanted from others, I had to do that sincerely myself as a poet. So yeah.
Thank you so much for that. I love that. I have to look up your work now. I love like thinking of the line breaks in terms of pain breaks and disruptions that way. That's great. Kelsey, I go to you now. So the question was, how does disability, depressed, neurodivergent experience inform your creative process?
I just want to say, Travis, I feel like we gotta talk. I feel like I'm vibing with what you're talking. Like I'm picking up what you're putting down. You know, like I really resonate with a lot of things you're saying. I would say that there is a chronic fatigue that is intrinsic to Blackness, the Black experience. I think that, you know, what I want people to know is that the way that I experience madness is inherently intersectional. So like surviving as a Black person in capitalism, in a white supremacist state, in a panty is exhausting. And so I feel like the ways in which I produce aren't always acceptable to institutions. Like I might experience productivity in like really intense short spurts followed by prolonged periods of lethargy, and then like a lot of guilt associated with that. And I also experience dysphoria and dysmorphia around like body stuff and gender stuff, which also really informs my poetic practice. So yeah, I feel like if I write a poem about Blackness, madness is inherently a part of it, even if it's not explicitly stated. And inversely, like, you know, if I write about madness, I'm talking about my Blackness, I'm talking about queerness, I'm talking about transness. And that also means it's like pretty hard for me to define my work, but all of those things come together and kind of coalesce to inform how my work manifests.
Thank you so much. We'll move to Lo now. So the question is, how does disability, depressed, psychotic, neurodivergent experience inform your creative process?
Yeah, I think that doing what I want when I want, since I'm an independent artist and I refuse to go back to the academy right now, I can like make my own timelines. And that was like, I recently picked up a contract for something that was really fun for me. And like, one, it is a privilege to be able to like make my own schedule. But two, I learned that I had and could to exploit that privilege after I was like, no more academia for me. Like no more external deadlines for me. Like I can't do it right now. I will only engage in things I can like shift in understanding, but also like that is not inherently like better. It's just like a different monster. So like I think it might be the illusion of choice. Like I still have to produce on other people's deadlines. But I think that it, for me right now in my madness, it like makes me feel better. Be able to work on, and I have like work that is commissioned and then like my studio practice, and these things are like very much related. But as opposed to like everything I produce is like destined for the outside world. Like a lot of what I do is just like for me in my in my studio until it becomes for someone else. So I think also like recognizing my capacity, like I'm very strict about doing one thing a day. Like if someone's like, what are you doing today? Like being only able to say like one thing, because if it's more than that, that's not for me. But like that's my capacity. Yeah.
I love that. I've had to work a lot on that during the pandemic. It actually, as awful as it was, I really had to practice that. What is the one thing, or maybe what are the two things I can actually get done today? Thank you so much for that. So do we have time for one more question? I guess that's for Lydia or Nancy. Okay, yay. So I had two more questions. One, I just wanted to know, like, what is one moment or one aspect of your work that you were really, really proud of? Like maybe something that came together and it was a fraught process getting there. What are you most proud of? Is there like one moment from your work that you want to share with us? So we'll go back to Travis.
This is also a tough one. I'm trying to think about one that feels most salient for this discussion right now. I think for me, because I didn't go through the traditional workshop training of a lot of creative writers, I always felt kind of marginalized and not necessarily welcome in poetic spaces because I didn't feel like I trained in the same way. So when I published my first mini chapbook called The Bone Setter, it was actually a reflection on my experience of going through chiropractic care for my scoliosis disability. And I remember in that collection, I felt like it was the first time that I had ever sort of thought of my work in an extended form rather than singular poems, to allow myself to think about work in terms of a larger project, in terms of a larger conversation. It was terrifying for me because I felt like I wasn't allowed to do that work because I didn't have the same kinds of credentials and training. And we can talk about sort of the ever-present shadow of imposter syndrome that accompanies so many of us in the academy. But that collection felt for me like an opportunity to write back toward medicine, but also write back toward the culture that doesn't want our voices to be published and doesn't see our work as worthy of publication. So when it came out, it meant the world to me to see my work circulate and then to also create community with people that I never thought I would be able to. So I would say that for sure.
Thank you so much. We'll move to Kelsey. So is there one moment or one poem that you're really proud of that you want to talk a little bit about?
I would say like, so I started writing poetry like deep into my grad school experience. So like I'd already kind of established like what my areas of like inquiry were going to be and like what I was going to focus on for my dissertation. And then, you know, it's like a lot of things happened. Poetry really entered my world in a big way. And so I felt really adamant that needed to be part of my academic work. And I feel like the way that I approach conversations about that was very like insistent and like asserting like this is a valid part both of my like personal like practice, but also my academic practice, and having the folks that support my academic work kind of like fully co-sign that and support me in that and support me in like merging the creative part of my brain with the more analytical part of my brain. That in and of itself felt like really exciting to me. Like just, it feels like what I'm going to be able to produce is going to be way more like holistically resonant and affirming to like my experience both as a scholar but also as a poet.
That's great. I'm glad you've been able to find a way to bring that together. I know I have the creative work that I do is so often just really for me, and it was what I did when I didn't want to work on my dissertation. So I have this whole document that's basically my creative writing that was entirely avoiding my dissertation. Everyone has a project, everyone has a side project, and that was mine, but not really meant for public viewing. So we'll turn to you, Lo. Is there an aspect of your work or maybe one portion of it that you are really proud of?
Yeah, so I'm working on this project that I wasn't planning on talking about, but it's called Beg Baddies with Euphoric Gender. And I said that because I didn't see any pictures. But I've been teaching people how to crochet and like physically like Black femmes how to make things and like transform wardrobes through like fabric. And it started from when my mom was my studio assistant, like during one of my projects during a workshop. She just so happened to be visiting me in town and she's like, I'm gonna help you. And it wasn't a question, it was just a statement. And then the fact that my mom could see a space in my art practice where like, of course she belonged was really important to me, especially like she was very supportive, but also like very scared when I had my manic episode. And like we worked through it to a point where she's like, oh, you're doing this for people like you. And I can see how I can support you with that. And so that was really cool.
That is super cool. The last question I had, I'm actually borrowing from Lydia because Lydia always asks this question and I just think it's great. It works well in this setting. So it's really just what brings you joy and comfort right now? And it could be like, is there something that has brought you joy and comfort throughout the pandemic or just something in this moment or recently? So I'll go back to you, Travis.
I'm, of course, a big video gamer, so it's nice to know that Pokemon Arceus is out, and so is Elden Ring, which is going to probably eat up the next few, probably years of my life. But The other thing that has brought me joy consistently throughout the pandemic has been speculative fiction, particularly speculative fiction by Black writers. I've been thinking about what futures we imagine, and so much of what disability justice and disability poetics is doing is trying to imagine those futures, however complicated and messy they can be. And there's been something really moving to me about, in the middle of crisis and pandemic, looking toward how speculative fiction writers from the past 30 to 40 years have dealt with similar questions about how to imagine beyond a crisis, and not sort of sugarcoat what a future could look like, but to really kind of do the work of examining the present in relation to possible futures, and realizing how, in some ways, the futures that we imagined at first are actually quite limited, that we actually need to do a lot of the difficult work of getting messy about what that future might look like and how that's going to feel and be lived through. So I feel like that has been really sustaining for me, to know that if we're going to get through this pandemic, and we will, what does it mean to memorialize the people that we've lost, but also think about what a truly just and inclusive future looks like.
Thank you so much. Kelsey has a question in the chat. Are you referencing Earthseed?
Among many, yes.
Among many. I was going to ask if you have recommendations, perhaps people here might be interested in what some of your favorite reads have been.
Hands down would be Octavia Butler's work, which continues in some ways teach itself. But I spent a lot of time thinking about N.K. Jamison's work recently too, especially as it's thinking about climate change and the future of the planet. So I've been returning a lot to the Broken Earth trilogy recently.
Excellent. Perhaps, I'm sure a number of people here have read it, but I was thinking of River Solomon, and I can't remember the name of the book. If anyone knows what I'm talking about, put it in the chat. I can't remember it, but someone else will. Anyway, we will move to Kelsey next. So the question is, what is something that has brought you joy and comfort? Could be like something that from the pandemic or something just right now in this moment.
Yeah, so I was privileged and fortunate enough to have top surgery in December. And like, just straight up, it was just one of the greatest days of my life. It was super, super painful. I loved every second of it. And I feel like I'm like on a daily basis just brought so much joy by looking at my chest and like feeling very at home in it and touching it all the time. And like, sometimes I have this weird fear that someone's gonna take it away. Like, and yeah, so that's just what brings me so much joy and comfort, is feeling sexy and just feeling a lot of gender euphoria in this season of my life.
Yay for gender euphoria and top surgery. So we will go to you, Lo. So what is something that has brought you joy and comfort during the pandemic, or maybe something recently that has brought you joy and comfort?
Yeah, I moved into a house that is mine. So that's really exciting for me to just nest and be in a space that, in the chaos of the pandemic and living in an apartment, for me, where like there's just like lots going on that you can't escape, like the typical like noises and just people just feeling around. But I live in Ohio and there's space here. So I have a house. I'm very excited about it. And I've started reading a lot of horror. Like, I love speculative fiction. I love to make work about speculative fiction. I just took a hard left. So I think I just finished Tinder is the Flesh, which and I should give a content warning. It is gruesome. But I've been reading a lot of horror, and Tinder is the Flesh is about all the animals die. So like people become me. And that's not giving away the plot. That's just like the first line. So if you have any good horror recs, send them my way.
Send Lo horror recommendations. Excellent. I think that's all the questions that I had for you. I didn't actually expect that we would get to all of them. Is there anything else that you would like to add to this conversation, picking up from someone else's comment from earlier? We can do like check in with each of you. Travis?
I was thinking about sort of through lines of our work, and like one of them, of course, is the horrors of graduate school, which I'm sure we could spend several hours talking about. I think the other thing too that I've noticed about something that links all of our work is how do we translate traumatic experiences into creative ones, and not in ways that diminish that trauma or sort of explain it away or compartmentalize it, but to really think through alongside with those experiences of trauma. And I'm left wondering whether or not creative practice in some ways is that which does that kind of translational work of helping us get through trauma, but also sharing in community with those who have also experienced similar kinds of trauma. In my teaching, I've been thinking a lot about this distinction between sympathy and empathy, where in some ways you can be sympathetic towards someone, as in you feel bad for them for a particular set of experiences, but then radical empathy is something that requires us to let go of the fact that we can ever fully understand and know someone else's experience, but still honor their capacity to do so. And I've been thinking a lot about the work that I want to do is committed to that empathy brand of things rather than sympathy. And we can talk about whether or not empathy is in and of itself limited, but I feel like the community that I need and has sustained me has been deeply empathetic in this moment.
I love that. That's so important to think about. I was just thinking we could, to address the beginning of your comment, we could probably have a whole separate webinar series on the horrors of graduate school and the like very real, not even joking, the real trauma that has for folks. Be careful what you wish for. All right. I'll go to Kelsey next. Is there anything that you want to add to the conversation or something that you meant to address but you didn't get a chance to?
Just want to say thank you so much. Thank you to Jess, Lydia, Nancy, the organizers, just like putting this together, having us in this space. It's meant so much. If there is time, I was going to share one more poem. It's my favorite poem that I've ever written, I guess. And it spoke to my feelings pre-surgery. But I feel like folks have reflected that they resonated with it for feelings outside of just like gender dysphoria. It's called The Body in Theory. I can drop a link after I read it. It's taken me over 20 years to embrace this encasement manifest of all things queer, grotesque, deviant, handsome, lovely. Still, crooked sternum is seeking one surgical steel scalpel like manic monarchs screeching off with their heads. Call it shyness. I avoid touching entire regions of my body like they aren't there, like I'm not there. Don't see myself in all reflections, only the kind ones with hands and tongues. Try to ignore that something vampiric in my dysphoria, a shameful bloodlust. Call to memory a time before the great betrayal, assigned fragile at birth, freak show in 2 acts, freak show, F word in 2 acts, fair weather D word, finding something elsewhere under the sky, under my skin, between my legs, between my lungs, think that I'd rather be bereft of such unimportant flesh and all the things we call ourselves in waking hours, savoring only the taut and tender peel, only the remnants, only the bandage, only what is left behind.
There's applause in the chat. Thank you so much for reading that. Lo, did you want to add anything to the conversation or share something that you didn't get a chance to?
First, I'll say thank you to the organizers. Thank you to my panelists. I was excited for this. I thought it was gonna be a good conversation and my heart is so full. Thank you for ending my Sunday like this with me. I should say something about work. Oh, I have a survey in my bio on my Instagram. My Instagram is Lo Smith Studios. It's a survey about gender in your clothes and how you feel about them. If you want to figure that out, take the survey. It's a link in my bio. Thank you.
And if the panelists want to add, I think we already have, if there are links to your work, or if you can tell us where we can find your work online, that would be great. I'm sure a lot of people here would be interested in that. Oh, and Nancy is adding some resources and some links in the chat right now. Are we taking audience questions at this time?
This is Lydia. If there are any questions from folks in the audience, now is your chance. So share those out in chat.
Diane has a question in the chat. Is this for a specific person or just for everyone? Diane asks, what are you hoping for in the next 10 days?
I'm working on a cardigan, so like I'm helping to finish that.
That sounds like a fun project. Anyone else have a short-term goal?
I'm hoping for a reprieve from winter. It has been icy and cold in Ohio. And of course, this, as somebody who is new to living to the Midwest, like I had imagined how cold it would be. But yeah, as somebody who grew up in the South, grew up in Atlanta, I'm used to sort of temperate winters. Let's just say this winter has been kicking my ass. So I feel that.
I should note that 3 of us right now are in Ohio and possibly all experiencing some degree of winter fatigue, me included. So there are some other questions here in the chat. So here's the next one. So for everyone, how do you relate with the difficulty of feeling forced to be productive while being disabled? That's an excellent question. Thank you for that. Does anyone want to tackle that? I think, Travis, a lot of your comments earlier definitely spoke to this, the feeling of having to feel productive in the academy.
I think Kelsey wanted to step in. Go for it.
Yeah, I can just say, like, I feel like I've really tried to liberate myself from the shame of being very transparent about the fact that, like, I really don't care about being productive, and I don't care if people think that that's whack or if I don't have a good work ethic. Like, I would like to work minimally. I would like to work as little as possible all the time. I'm a nap incarnate, and so I think that like kind of developing like in like unapologetic politic around that has like made me feel a lot better. Like if you email me, Jess, Lo, y'all can attest to this, you might not get a response for many moons, and I'm comfortable, accepting that as part of who I am, and yeah, I think we should all do a lot of work to free ourselves from feeling pressure about our levels of productivity. Like if you ain't got it, yeah, you ain't got it, and that's fine.
I love that. Lo, did you want to add anything?
Oh, I was just saying, like, in one of it, like I didn't answer the email. You'll survive. It's art, not the ER. Like, no one's gonna die. I've worked, I think, with, there's like sometimes when I disclose my disability in work environments, people get really weird really fast. So there's this like line of like, can I disclose my disability without endangering my paycheck? And I think having really aggressive boundaries on my end has helped me like, oh, it shouldn't be because, and this, I'm not trying to give advice, this is my experience. It's not because I am bipolar that I need time off. It's because I'm a person and it's not your fucking business. That like, you shouldn't be, you should be calling me on the weekends. Like there's no reason. And this is not a helpful piece of advice. So I tried to make it into one. I think knowing knowing my capacity and then like keeping my business out of people who like don't care about my capacity, like keeping my business away from people. And like, sometimes you can't do that, but yeah, like same, now I'm my best friend. I will get back to you in 3 to 5 business days if you text me. Maybe I go months without talking to my friends because like that's the capacity I have, but I also like want to keep doing what I'm doing. This is now a rant. That is it. Thank you.
An excellent rant. I hope I'm citing the right person. I want to say that Gina B. Kim, who's a feminist disability studies scholar, has a phrase, slow professoring. And I'm really embracing that right now as I am in my first teaching job after being in grad school. But I too, like I still struggle with disclosure in academia. In settings like this, I'm very open about it. But even where I work, like I am and I'm not. It's something I'm constantly working on. We had a couple of other questions here. So there's a question about form. Are there any poetic forms you want to explore more or get into for our poets here today?
That's such a great question. Because I didn't quite have the traditional training that a lot of creative writers had, I didn't really get an exposure to a wide variety of forms. But something that I think influences what I think about formalism more generally is that I found form to be a really restrictive experience, especially as I tried to find new ways of talking about my experience beyond the ways I've inherited. So I think I have a sort of natural resistance to form because I feel like one, it's a tradition that actually is not reflective of my experience. And I feel like it's often inherited and in some ways over fetishized in the community. But something that I've been thinking a lot about has been some of my colleagues prompting me to think about form as a way of creating parameters for thought, right? So creating a set of conditions that help you think about something in a particular way that shouldn't be seen as a blockage or an impasse, but as a way of narrowing down a large field of possibility. And that's something that I've been pretty bad at doing, but I've been practicing over time. So I'm really interested in highly sort of regulated forms. So I'm thinking about things like pantoums, sestinas, even sort of older poetic forms that have sort of fallen out of fashion. Sort of what does it mean to crip them in exciting ways? I say this as someone who is kind of taking a kind of irreverent approach to them, but I like to think that that's like the most crip way of going about it anyway.
That is an excellent crip way of going about it. Thank you so much for that. Did you want to add anything, Kelsey?
No, I resonate with Travis's sentiments. I also was not formally trained in poetics, so I feel like I've not been exposed in like a workshopy way to a lot of forms, and I also too I think engaging with form for me feels like literally a different thing than writing poetry. Like when I start doing like form stuff, I'm like, this now is like a puzzle type challenge type thing, and then my poetry is like over here. And maybe one day I can merge those things. I'll say like my best friend put me on Kwansabas, which is like a form that is like Black and short, and I really liked it. So it's like for me feels very different than like old ass, whack ass, Shakespearean ass shit. No shade to anyone who loves Shakespeare here. But yeah, so I think like there's different ways that you can engage with forms that maybe like appeal to your particular style. But I don't know. I just be writing whatever, however it comes out, and that's the form that I like, you know.
Thank you. Lo, are there any other forms, mediums that you're thinking about experimenting with or trying? It's not a poetry question, but figured we could extend it to you.
Yeah, I just got a glass grinder, so I'm doing some stained glass because that's my answer to Ohio winter. It's just like completely new form. I know how to weld because like gay, but like we're gonna see the cross references to stained glass. And that's, I was like, yeah, I'm trying to be form, but my conversation doesn't look, I'm just trying not to cut myself is what's happening right now.
That's excellent. I love it. Stained glass. That's excellent. Did we have any other questions from the audience? I didn't see anything else. There's a lot of commentary if you haven't seen in the chat. People are really responding to your answers. I don't know if there are any questions coming from the Facebook people. I can't see that commentary, but. There are also a lot of really great, so people are adding links to other people who do work with cripping different forms. Nancy has some links in the chat that you might be interested in.
Oh, I have one little thing for my poet friends and for the folks listening. So I make books, like I bind them, I like make books, but I don't make the inside. That's like not my jam, or like the content, I just make the form. And I would love to know about people cripping book forms, if that's a thing. Like there's artist books, which are, it's not about the content, it's about the form of the book, but like it's like a tension filled relationships with writers, because like the inside isn't the important part.
This is Lydia. My friend Kairani Baroka, KhairaniBarokka, Kairani Baroka, who is a guest on a previous webinar we did on disability justice and poetry, published one of their books, Indigenous Species, with a visual representation of Braille on the page, on each page of the book, which presents their poem alongside paintings. And there's a note in Oka's book, OKKA, the name that she goes by, that says that she is hoping that she wants to publish a version of Indigenous Species that actually includes tactile art on each page and not simply a representation of it. But she ran into production issues with figuring out how to actually produce the book so that it was accessible to people reading text as well as reading tactile information. But I did find that one interesting response from another disabled BIPOC poet that I usually don't hear much discussion of among those of us who have sighted privilege, regardless of our madness and neurodivergence.
Thank you so much for that, Lydia. Does anyone else have a final comment? Otherwise, I think we can close. Thank you so much for all being here today. I really enjoyed learning more about your work and hearing about your perspectives.